interviewing the leading private equity executives and unlocking the secrets of success. Welcome to the Private Equity Podcast with Alex Rawlings.
Hello, everybody, and welcome back to the Private Equity Podcast. Joining us today is Jason Glende, an experienced P&L leader and Chief Commercial Officer within private equity-backed businesses. Welcome, and thank you for sharing your insights with us today, Jason.
Absolutely. Pleasure to be here.
As is customary on the podcast, if you could give us a 60 to 90-second breakdown of you, please.
Absolutely. So I am born and raised in Southeast Texas, so kind of on the Louisiana and Gulf Coast border. It's a very industrial part of Texas, so very industrial town, better known as the Golden Triangle. So a lot of industry there. Grew up around refining, petrochemical, pulp and paper, kind of heavy industry. Went to university to study electrical engineering. When I came out of university, started my career with Honeywell. Quite funny story. I joined a round table of interviews with different disciplines, and the VP of sales offered me a job. I told him I didn't want to be in sales. I was an engineer. And looking back over 25 years, it was the best decision that anyone ever made for me. So it started my career in something that I absolutely love and have a lot of passion around. So spent around 15 years within Honeywell, went to venture capital backed business. Upon the exit of that business, moved through oil and gas and through family manufacturing. And so that's kind of where I'm at today, and kind of had a broad experience across multiple markets. But all around commercial, and the last couple of years running a P&L.
Excellent. So what's one mistake you see either private equity firms or portfolio companies making, and what action would you suggest to correct them?
Yeah, so I don't know that I would call it a mistake, but one of the areas that I can see is when private equity firms only look at a business from the financial lens, and they're only looking at it from the investment. I think one of the places they miss is taking a look at the people within the business, and understanding who the key people are. They're not always the ones with the fancy titles, but there's always, especially in a founder-led business, there's always a few key individuals that help make that successful.
Absolutely. We've also got to look at the team and a huge, certainly a huge focus on that. So you're in the early stages, why I was interested to speak to you, Jason, of making that transition into, I know you had it earlier in your career, but certainly now and as a senior exec, moving into that PE-backed business and operating that world. And that was a goal of yours from our earlier discussion prior to we hit the live button. What was it that attracted you to move into the private equity-backed world?
The private equity world gives you the ability to look at growth, right? It's very, very simple mindset for someone coming into an organization. There's not 50 different goals that you may see sometimes in a publicly traded company. It's very clear focused. How can we build growth into this organization? How can we build stable growth through inorganic or organic? And so it's very, very clear, which I enjoy. And it's also usually a very roll up your sleeves environment. Not a lot of political discussions. There's no real room for that, right? It's more or less just everyone coming in, having a clear goal of where we're going to go, and then executing upon that goal.
Excellent. No, absolutely. It gives a lot more, certainly a very attractive industry. And I know that we have, whether it's a small or large, I'm not sure, but we have an amount of individuals who are looking to get into private equity-backed businesses and make that transition like you have. For those that are listening that want to make that transition and want some advice on it, what would you share to them to help them made those steps to get into PE, because it is seen as you need private equity experience to work in private equity. And I certainly know that's true. And obviously, technically, nobody had private equity experience at the beginning. So someone's obviously doing something.
Exactly right. I think one of the key areas that you need to know before you get into private equity is knowing that there tends to be, and this is not, I guess, this is based on my experience, maybe not, necessarily across the board, but for the most part, there's not a lot of organization around you like in a big public company, right? It's more of a roll up your sleeves. You may have to wear multiple hats. You may be hired for one job, but you need to fill in and help, do 10 different things. And I think some people get comfortable working in large companies where it's just a day-to-day task. And in private equity, one day it could be everything flowing well, and then the next day, all things go to the ground. So, and you've got to rebuild. So, you have to be very fluent in the way that you work. You have to be willing to do multiple things. The other piece I would say is make sure you do your homework. So, in large companies, you don't always have a clear investment view, right? You join, that the stock price is going one way. Everyone just kind of comes in and does their job. In private equity, one of the key things that I learned was what you need to understand what the investment thesis is. You need to understand what the PE firm actually wants from the business, because not all growth fits along with the proper growth that the PE firm is going to push, right? So high volume, low margin might kill the multiple. So it may look good on paper, but it's actually not the case of where the PE firm wants to take the business. And so I think you can spend a lot of time and effort building a business that actually doesn't follow along the investment thesis. So I would say make sure you understand that investment thesis up front and make sure you feel comfortable that that's the way you want to take the business.
With one of the areas that I believe private equity backed individuals get that opportunity to step in is when they can demonstrate a huge amount of success and therefore have the opportunity to come into private equity or at least approached about it because of what they've achieved. Now, I know from our earlier discussion that you've experienced tremendous growth from a revenue perspective in the last, kind of two businesses outside of PE, one being Grundfos and the other one being Fight Corporation. What do you put that kind of success down to, both in commercial and P&L type leadership roles, to take that business so far forward, which in essence looks like private equity type numbers, but I think Grundfos probably publicly listed, I know it's European, and Fight Corporation, I don't know, but how have you kind of achieved that, and what do you kind of put that success down to?
Sure. Both are family-owned businesses, quite different in scale, but both are family-owned businesses. First and foremost, I would say a very good team. Both organizations had just fantastic people, and I think that is, to me, a business doesn't succeed without really good people. So, as a leader, the first thing you really need to do is make sure you go in and listen to those. And in each situation, I found key individuals that for years knew exactly what the business needed to do, but no one would listen to them. For example, taking one of the businesses direct versus going through a distribution channel. No one had listened for quite some time. And so came in, listened to them. And then the second goal of a good leader to me is just taking all of the additional tasks that are asked of people, especially good salespeople, and taking it off their plate. So I always look at my job as, if I can take all of those extra things off of their plate, be a buffer between them and maybe upper management, and just allow them to go sell and take care of customers, you will end up seeing growth. So I think that's the first key component. And then the second piece is whether you're selling a SaaS offering or whether you're selling a manufacturing widget, you need to listen to your customers. I think all too often we spend a lot of time as marketing professionals or senior sales and trying to come up with a wonderful value proposition that everyone's going to want to buy your product. When in the end, if you just go ask your customers, I will tell you that the majority of time, they will say that they made a purchase or they decided not to make a purchase based on how easy you are to do business with and how good your customer service is. And so I think that's something that you need to focus on. So I spend a lot of time listening to customers and making sure that we're building a platform and a customer experience, whether that be through a tech stack or whether that just be through a proper inside sales organization, to make sure that your customers are happy and they see you as the easiest company to do business with. That's one of the quickest ways to actually get price over a low price type of bid, is to make them feel comfortable. So I think that's one. And then you've got to build a winning culture, right? So if you take your team, you set clear goals, you get everyone kind of aligned to where you want to take the business, then it just becomes easy. Then your job as the executive or the leader of the organization is really to go out and look for new opportunities. What are adjacent markets we could be in? What are I'm an engineer, so I tend to lean on my engineering background. I like to look at data. I like to understand why our customers are buying, what type of customers, what type of market should we be in. And sometimes you have to make hard decisions. Sometimes there are customers that are, whether they be a really difficult customer, and so it takes a lot of cost to acquire or cost to keep that customer. And then is it worth keeping them? Or is it worth the dip in revenue for a short term to take those resources and go find a more profitable customer? SaaS companies have a metric called LTV to CAC, right? So long-term value versus the cost to acquire that customer, and it's long-term cost to acquire. So if it costs you up front to acquire, but it also costs you a lot of effort all through for lower margin or lower value over a time, then even in an industrial company, you should be looking at that to ask yourself, is that customer worth the effort that we're putting into it? So I think if you take all of those things, put proper processes in place, one of the key areas for processes, you tend to hear that word a lot. I've listened to your podcast quite a bit, and you hear people say process. To me, you never want processes to take care of other processes, right? You want them to be as simple as possible, but the ultimate goal in a sales process is to increase win rate. How do I increase win rate? Well, you want to take your quote unquote lowest performer and make sure that they are working as close to the highest performer and as successful as the highest performer. And so how do you do that, right? So you put processes in place that allow them to learn over time, but also take what makes the good or the best quote unquote salesperson that you have, take those attributes and make sure that those lower performers are actually achieving those as well. So those are the type of processes I see that work best when they're very clear, concise, and simple.
Makes sense. And you spoke a little bit about culture there. Now that's what I regard as a recruitment myth. That's you must have this culture, and we'll do a cultural fit. We'll assess all this kind of stuff. And then when you get into the detail of it, the actual recruiter doesn't have that. I'd obviously separate myself from that, but I'm happy to be challenged. Now, sales culture is something I've worked on heavily within Raw Selection here and building that out. What's your interpretation of what a good culture looks like, or a progressive culture, or a successful culture, however you want to put it, that's indicative to a successful team within a commercial environment?
So there's two main pieces to me. One, you have to have customer focus. And that is a very easy thing to say and not an easy thing sometimes for organizations to do. And so, because sometimes it costs you money and it's easy to cut cost in internal support functions, but you need to understand what that actual detriment is to the customer. And so everything you need to do around customer focus, whether that be the customer calling. I've been in organizations, quite honestly, to tell you that when the customer calls, the first thing that the inside sales or support person will say is, you need to call your local rep. Well, that is the worst thing you can do, right? So the entire culture and organization needs to be around, how can I sincerely take care of my customer, right? That's one. Two is, it needs to be an open environment where failure is okay. You need to understand that you're never going to win 100% of the jobs that you're going after, But if you're not chasing the hard jobs, if you're not chasing the competitive work, and from a management standpoint, it's okay to lose those, right? Then you need to really reevaluate your risk profile, because if your salespeople think if they're going to be in trouble if they lose a job, well, then they'll only go after those safe, easy, reoccurring clients or what have you. They're never going to stretch themselves and go after the harder work. And so you have to have a culture that allows for successful winning, to celebrate winning, but also use any kind of loss just more as a learning opportunity and then move on. So salespeople want to be able to speak their mind. They want to be able to communicate what they're doing. And a lot of times they'll try to hide those if they're worried that they're going to be punished for a loss. And so it's really about bringing out a successful mindset and an open culture to be able to properly discuss the business. So,
sorry to interrupt here. Just a quick note to highlight our new sponsor, Grata. The private equity market is rapidly shifting to a data-driven, proprietary deal sourcing standard. Grata provides the window into over 7 million middle market private companies. Contact Grata so you can access the market first. Request a demo at www.grata.com. Now back to the podcast. Yeah, culture is something that's significantly overlooked, and you can create processes around it. And part of that with the customer, looking after the customer and making sure that they're well catered for, and being in your own shoes, and that applies for the private equity investors and professionals listening. That deal origination piece and conversation, that is a commercial role. It's a commercial element, part of your position, and even if it's selling to LPs, etc. And how that's communicated with. And you'll be surprised as a business leader when you reflect on it, or even if you put yourself going through that process, you're like, why are we doing that? Because it's putting customers off, or why are we saying this? Why are we having this level of conversation? Why are we not doing X, Y, and Z? And it will significantly surprise you. And sometimes getting hands-on with these things yourself can make those changes. So with you, Jason, sticking on that sales piece, having been in sales for many years, what mistakes do you typically see kind of commercial salespeople making? And what are the things that you've done in your career to, either protect against that or make changes in that team?
One of the areas that you commonly see for salespeople is they tend to overemphasize their value and de-emphasize their competitors' value. It's this pride mindset of our product is better, our service is better. And so you put yourself as number one and you think you have a clear advantage of winning, when in fact, that same competitor that you're going against has the same features and functions and they feel the same way. And so I think a lot of times you get a little too overconfident. And so you don't really do your full due diligence. I think that's one key area that I see a mistake being made. And so I think that's where processes can come in place. So I have a process that I tend to follow called a field opportunity review. And what that whole purpose is you get a cross-functional team, whether it be, let's say you're in an industrial service organization, you get the service manager, you get the operations manager, maybe you get one of the field technicians, and you get 20 minutes to talk about your opportunity and why you think you're going to win it. And then you get 20 minutes where those in the audience will actually ask you questions. And then you get 20 minutes to reflect on what may be some gaps that you have. And so it's a clear, just quick 50 to 60 minute process, but it gives you a well-rounded understanding, and it kind of keeps that mindset of, this one value proposition is why I'm going to win, and I'm going to hone in on that one place. So I think that's one of the main areas. The second to me is not knowing when to step out of an opportunity. And so we think that every opportunity is one that we need to win, when in reality is maybe the cost to acquire that customer is just too high. Maybe we actually don't have the feature and function that they want, but a lot of times salespeople will overcompensate and try to convince the customer because they want the win, Because let's be honest, salespeople are very competitive. They're very driven by the commission check that they're going to get. And so they'll chase just about anything. When I think the best quality that you'll see out of a salesperson is one that has sincerity on what they're trying to sell to their customer. They actually want to solve the customer's problem, and they're willing to actually say, I don't think we can accomplish that. It's probably best that we walk away. Or we don't have that feature. We will in 12 months, but I have to be honest with you, we don't have it today. And so I think those two situations, if you have a sincere salesperson that truly wants to solve that customer's problem, and they're willing to take advice from others and take a high level view of that customer, they're going to succeed more often than not.
That's excellent. And what three attributes do you believe, Jason, makes a individual a top performer?
I think humility has got to be number one. So if you think and humility along with self-awareness. So if you think you're the smartest person in the room, you're probably not. I think the best way you can go into a situation is understand you're not the smartest person in the room. Be willing to listen and learn from every level in the organization, right? So this is something that I think is really keen in understanding is go to the shop floor or go to the software development engineer that's been there since day one. Go sit down and just listen. Don't tell them why you're there and why you're so important. Go and listen and ask them what things they would have done differently. And then go ask the customers the same exact questions. Why are you here? Why do you? And that will give you a very broad view of the business. And so as a leader, I think that is number one. So going on and listening to everyone else. Two, you need to be genuine. So there's all too often that people will go and they love to go ask questions of people in the organization, but they don't really listen to the answer, right? They're just doing it because they think that's the right thing to do. And I think if you treat people respectfully, I learned this from my dad growing up. You look someone in the eye, you treat them respectfully, no matter where they sit in the organization, no matter where they sit in the class in the world, right? You treat everyone as a human being and you listen to them and you just be genuine, to be honest. If you don't agree with something, politely disagree. Doesn't mean you have to agree with everything everyone says, but be genuine in the way that you approach people. And I think that's something that you can spot fairly quickly, and people actually spot it. And you'd be amazed at how difficult it is to work with someone if they don't think that you're truly interested in what they're saying. And I guess the third is just a passion and energy to succeed, right? So I call it respectful competitiveness. Be willing to go out there. Don't like to lose. It's okay if you do shake hands and walk away, if you will, but just having that passion every day when you get to work. I think if you put those three things, the best leaders that I've ever worked for had those three components. They made it fun to work. They made it exciting to get to work. They listened to you when you had a problem. They may not agree with you, but they did listen. And then they were willing to change their mind. I think those three things will always make a successful leader.
Sounds like you've worked with some good leaders there. So you're fairly early in your journey in private equity backed businesses, but interested to get your perspective here. What do you love about the private equity industry that no doubt attracted you into it as well, as you spoke about earlier, but also what do you dislike about it?
I love the diversity. One of the reasons that I decided to make this move, my brother is a successful CEO in private equity, and I've always loved the fact that as they've made acquisitions, it's a new and exciting new business to go into, or taking a founder-led business and reaching its full potential. Maybe it's a small regional player that then you can expand nationally or globally. I think that is the most attractive piece to me. Just that single focus growth mindset, profitable growth mindset, and knowing that there's an accomplishment at the end of that. So somewhat of a, the term limit, you will, of a private equity hold is almost a positive, because you feel like the timeline, whether that be 3, 5, or 7 years, You know the goal, and you just go straight forward at it. I think that's what's attracted me the most. And then the diversity of the businesses that you can work with. One of the areas that I see that can be a downfall or can be a negative. I don't know that I would say it's a negative, but it can be, is around looking at a deal from only a financial standpoint and forgetting that there are people in that organization. So when you look at a transaction and it's purely financial, those that are in the business itself, they're not the ones they didn't make the money on the sale, and they're not going to make the money when it's sold again. Right. And so you have to realize it's people's lives, and that a lot of times when the transaction first completes, there's a lot of nervousness. There's a lot of worry about what's going to happen to their job. And so I think taking a little bit of a personnel and an organizational view when in the acquisition, identifying those people all the way down through the organization that are key to making that investment actually work. So you're not going to achieve your goals, your exit goals, based on spreadsheets. You're going to achieve it by the people in the organization aligning to what it is you want to do, and then taking it, forward from there.
Makes sense. Yeah, it's, again, that focus on people, as you mentioned earlier. So what are your influences, Jason? What do you read? What do you watch? What do you listen to? And what would you suggest or recommend to others to check out?
Yeah, so I'm a little diverse in the way that I like to listen. I've turned mostly to podcasts, and quite honestly, I really enjoy the PE podcast. I think it's really, you can learn a lot from listening to how others have succeeded, how they've approached problems, and I think that is something that has always been very interesting to me. There's a podcast called How I Built This. It's about entrepreneurs, about how they started their business. And I think I've never really been that risk averse type of entrepreneur that just, ran out and started a business. And so it's always something that I've been keen about. And so it's really it's really interesting to hear how they approach that markets. I love historical books. I think it's great to learn from history. I just finished one called Empire of the Summer Move, about the rise and fall of the Comanches. I think it's a really interesting book from a Native American standpoint. Due to your listeners, I just started a few weeks ago, Atomic Habits by James Clear. Fantastic book, just kind of helps put things in perspective. So, and of course, I've read all of the business books, The Good, the Great, and all of those. But I try to surround myself with as many diverse opinions as possible. I think when you're working in teams that all look the same, talk the same, think the same, I think you're doing yourself a disservice. I think you need to surround your people with that have ideas and are willing to speak up, that are completely opposite of your own. And I think that's the best way you get a good, clear picture of where you need to go. Sometimes you have to make the hard decision. And sometimes you have to change your mind. But so I enjoy listening to areas that might not be the same exact way that I think, just to see how other people may approach a problem. So
I've certainly done plenty of that, especially with politics and looking into different areas and getting different aspects, and broadens the mind and gives you a different talking point, and also gives you a perspective of other people, which ironically, as we spoke a lot about sales, I think not enough people as a salesperson, and I don't care who you are and what job you're at, I can't remember the famous quote and who said it, but it doesn't matter what job you're in and what position you have, but you goddamn better be in sales. Because somehow, some reason you are selling at some level, whether it's for the business, whether it's for yourself, whether it's asking for a pay rise, whether it's negotiating with a buyer, whether it's buying a house, whether it's selling a house, we're all sales. So certainly that aspect is an important part.
I agree. I've had the pleasure of working in some really good international organizations, and it really, sales all comes down to one thing. People buy from people they know, people they like, and people they trust. And if you don't have all three of those, you have a higher chance of not succeeding. And it doesn't matter if I'm talking to my counterpart in Singapore, running Asia, or whether it's Northern Europe. It's all the same, right? People want to know who they're buying from. They need to trust that what you're telling them is true, and they need to like you, because if they don't like you, they won't pick up the phone. So if you have all three of those and you're sincere in the way that you're approaching, I think you're already along your way to having a greater than 50% chance of winning that opportunity. So.
Absolutely. And if anybody wishes to reach out to you post this podcast, Jason, how best to do so, please?
Yeah, so best way is through LinkedIn, or we can I'll leave my email address with you, and we can get that through. Please reach out, and love to connect and talk to anyone who's interested and hear some of the trials and tribulations I've had as trying to get into private equity over the last 5 to 7 years. So.
No doubt. I know we get a lot of people that are interested in PE or been PE-backed business and looking to develop their skills and network. So no doubt you'll get some outreach from that, Jason. So, well, thank you very much for sharing your insights today, Jason. I think it's interesting to get a different perspective of someone who's just starting on their PE-backed journey. Has obviously got a very successful brother who's done multiple exits, as you mentioned, and therefore knows the space incredibly well, but also to give people a little bit of hope that there is opportunity to get into this industry without magically appearing in it somehow at some point in your career. So thank you very much for everything you've shared today, Jason.
Absolutely. I enjoyed it. Thank you, Alex.
And as always, thank you very much for those for joining us. Should you ever need support with private equity professionals or portfolio executive hiring, please do reach out to us at Raw Selection. And if you haven't done so, please do subscribe, and you'll be notified of our next podcast, which comes out every 2 weeks. But till the next time, keep smashing it, and thank you very much for listening.
Thank you for listening to the Private Equity Podcast on www.raw-selection.com.